In the second part of this training module, we focus on the tuning of the crop parameters. It consists in adjusting the parameters affected by planting and management, cultivar-specific parameters affected by conditions in the soil profile, cultivar class conservative crop parameters, and soil management dependent parameters. Let's talk about the parameters affected by planting and management. These are type of planting method, plant density, and time to 90% seedling emergence. The type of planting method can be direct sowing or transplanting. If we have direct sowing, then the size of the canopy of the germinating seedling is known by AquaCrop. It is a conservative crop parameter. When a crop is transplanted, the size of the transplanting seedling depends on the time it spends in the nursery, so we have to specify what is the size of the seedling in case of transplanting. Secondly, we need to specify the plant density, because that determines the initial canopy cover. CC for canopy cover and NOT for initial. Now the initial canopy cover, that is at the moment of emergence. AquaCrop needs that to describe the canopy development in function of time. CC naught can be calculated as the plant density times the size of the canopy cover of the seedling. For example, if the density is 154,000 plants per hectare and the size of the seedling is 6.5 square centimeters per plant, then CC naught is calculated by multiplying the density with size seedling after adjusting the units and multiplying it with 100 to get it in percentage. This corresponds with 1%. Plant density determines the initial canopy cover. It determines also the maximum canopy cover that can be reached. In AquaCrop, we write it as CCX, X for maximum. Now, the maximum canopy cover is reached in the mid-season. When plant density is dense, CCX is likely to be close to 100%. If plant density is thin, then CCX will be much more smaller. Here you see an example of the relation between plant density and the maximum canopy cover reached in the mid-season for cabbage crops. For plant densities of 6 plants per square meter, CCX that can be reached is something as 73%. While if you put 12 plants per square meter, CCX is already something as 95%. The final parameter affected by planting and management is the time to 90% seedling emergence. So we have to specify that time, since it is affected by field preparation, soil temperature and soil water content. So let's start with the tuning of the tomato crop, which is cultivated in Foggia, Italy. This is done by updating the crop characteristic. In this menu, the limited set of crop parameters is displayed. These are the parameters which need to be adjusted. Let's start with tuning the parameters which are affected by planting and management. They are here in the development tab sheet and more precisely in the initial canopy cover tab sheet of the development tab sheet. Here I have first of all to display what is the type of planting method. For tomato, let's select transplanting. Since AquaCrop does not know the size of the transplant, we have to specify it here, let's say 20 square centimeters. I click on OK. Second thing is, what is the plant density? This is specified here directly. For the moment, it has 33,000 plants. Let's assume that we have only 1 plant per square meter. That corresponds with 10,000 plants per hectare. That is one way of specifying the plant density. We can also select one of the predefined classes, or we can enter CC node directly here. Another way is to use this button, the estimate button, which estimates the plant density from sowing information or for distances between the plants. If I click on estimate, I can change the row planting. I cannot change the sowing rate since this is a transplanted crop, of course. Here I can change the distance between the rows and the distance between the plants in the rows. That's row planting. So here I can specify that the row spacing is more something like 1.2 meters and the plant spacing in the rows is 0.75. This corresponds with 11,000 plants per hectare, and given the size of 20 square centimeters of the transplanted seedling, I get an initial canopy cover of 0.22. I can accept that, and now my plant density is specified as 11,111 plants per hectare. The next thing is to specify the maximum canopy cover which can be reached with that particular plant density. This is done in the second tab sheet, Canopy Development. Here I specify the maximum canopy cover. I can alter it by increasing or decreasing it, or by selecting a specific class. Let's say that we have a well-covered canopy CCX, which is more or less like 90%. The final adjustment of the parameters which are affected by the planting is here the time from transplanting to recovering. So the first days the crop does not grow because it is recovering. Let's assume that this takes 1 week. So I put it at 7 days. After tuning of the parameters affected by planting and management, we move now to the cultivar specific parameters. Many of the differences among crop cultivars are related to the timing of development stages. So we need to specify the time to reach the maximum canopy cover, senescence, physiological maturity, flowering, and the duration of flowering. In this slide, the times are graphically displayed. They consist of the time to reach the maximum canopy cover, beginning of canopy senescence, time to physiological maturity, the time to start of flowering, and finally the duration of the flowering stage. After specifying the parameters affecting by planting and management, let's now move to the tuning of the cultivar specific crop parameters. This is done in the Canopy Development tab sheet. From field observation in Foggia for the year 2000, I know that it takes about 70 days to reach the maximum canopy cover. That senescence starts at day 115 and that maturity is reached on day 145. Instead of specifying the days, a more easy way might to specify it in calendar days. In the calendar, I can see that maximum canopy cover was reached on the 10th of June, that senescence started on the 25th of July, and maturity was reached on the 23rd of August. Let's now specify the moment of flowering. From field observations in Foggia, I know that flowering occurs on the 1st of June. So I can indicate that here, the 1st of June. Let's look now in the development sheet, and then more precisely in the flowering and yield formations sheet. So it means that it takes 61 days after transplanting before flowering is reached. The final thing which I still need to specify is the duration of flowering. This is only 30 days. The next step in the tuning process consists in specifying the crop parameters which are affected by conditions in the soil profile. They consist of the maximum effective rooting depth and the time to reach that depth. The rooting depth and the time to reach it, they are affected by soil physical and soil chemical characteristics. Here you see a graphical display of the crop development in function of time. What we need to specify is the time to reach the maximum rooting depth and the maximum rooting depth itself. AquaCrop used the concept of effective rooting depth. That is the soil depth where major crop water uptake takes place. So the initial rooting depth is not 0, but for simulation purposes, a depth of 0.2, 0.3 meter is considered. It is the depth from which the germinating seed can extract water. Now, if the crop starts growing, then of course the root zone, the effective rooting depth, will expand. And that is described by the root zone expansion curve. After the tuning of the parameters affected by planting and management and the cultivar-specific crop parameters, I still need to tune the crop parameters affected by the conditions in the soil profile. They are given in this tab sheet, root deepening. Here I can see that the maximum effective rooting depth is 1 meter. I can change that here, or I can change it by selecting one or another class. Now let's assume that we have a rooting depth of 1 meter. Here I specify the time to reach the maximum effective rooting depth, which is 69 days. Now this is a more difficult crop parameter to guess. Therefore, I can look at the expansion rate. Typical expansion rates are something as 1 centimeter per day, but maybe up to 2 centimeters per day when conditions are optimal, a warm soil and no restrictive soil layers. So let's go for 1 centimeter per day. Then the maximum rooting depth is reached after 83 days. The next step in tuning of crop parameters is to look at some of the cultivar class conservative crop parameters. Some of the parameters assigned to the conservative group may indeed vary within small limits for different cultivars of crop species. This is the result of plant breeding and biotechnology. One of the cultivar class conservative crop parameters, which is likely to change in the future, is the reference harvest index. The reference harvest index is displayed in the production tab sheet. Here we find the crop water productivity and the harvest index tab sheet. Here we find the reference harvest index. It is the representative harvest index as reported in literature for the chosen crop under non-limiting conditions. Although the reference harvest index is conservative, it can change to a fair extent for different cultivars. For our cultivars, it is just 60%. The final step in tuning of the crop parameters consists in adjusting the soil and management depending parameters as the response to soil fertility stress. However, this is not explained in this module, it is explained in module 4.7. In this slide, you find an overview of the parameters which needs to be tuned. These are the parameters affected by planting and management, the cultivar-specific crop parameters linked with phenology, parameters affected by conditions in the soil profile, and the cultivar class conservative crop parameters.